So Raymond E. Feist is one of those authors who has A, been around the block long enough to have dealt with the television adaptation and the film adaptation process quite a few times, and B, is a best-selling author enough that we can respect his opinion on all things related to these topics because he's sold in excess of 20 million copies of his books. So he's not as well sold as Tolkien was, but he is still a very celebrated author of the Riftwar Saga and a bunch of other really amazing stuff over the years. The Riftwar Saga for me was one of those defining books as I was growing up, especially with the way he described his Thieves Guild. That's definitely influenced some of the stuff I've done with my own work. Fairy Tale was an amazing sort of contemporary fantasy novel that I read, kind of like a horror fantasy. Anyway, he's a great author. He recently waded into the Rings of Power discussion in a roundabout way because what he has on his Facebook page is there's this article that again he sold the rights to make an adaptation of his Riftwar Saga, or at least of some of the books, and the process is ongoing, and also this is not the first time that he has sold the rights. There have been multiple projects over the years that have started to go into some form of production and then for whatever reason or another never actually went through things. This is a great conversation around the complexities of what it takes to take a book series to the completed product, whether it's something that appears on the film or on the small screen. And I wanted to just kind of walk people through some of his comments because he is very active on Facebook when he can be. He's 76 years old and he's still writing a lot and he has some health issues from time to time, but overall he still stays very active. And this particular thread, which he reposted, I mean, he originally posted this, I want to say a few months back, probably earlier in 2022, and then he reposted it again. So for those of you who didn't know about this, I'm going to go just dive into the article really quick. By the way, this will be a longer video here on my channel this morning, so if you're new here and you've never done one of my rant discussion videos before, some of them are usually around 15-20 minutes long. This one will probably be a little bit longer because we'll be diving into a lot of different stuff. And if you like what you see here today, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell icon so that you never miss updates like this, which generally come out at 6 a.m. every single morning. I'm here in the chat with people. You can ask questions, however you want to do it. These premieres, I'm always here at 6 in the morning. Lots of other stuff happens throughout the day. So this was February, yeah, February of this year. So it's been a hot minute, and my God, that is bright because I don't have dark mode on. All right. Riftwar Cycle, excuse me, is going to be adapted at newly launched Six Studios. Jeff Huang and Carl Choi, entrepreneurs and lifelong fans of comic books, fantasy, sci-fi, and horror stories, have formed Six Studios as a genre-focused content company, and its first major content purchase was the rights to the first six books in Raymond E. Feist and Jenny Wirt's international best-selling fantasy books, The Riftwar Cycle, for television. Writers Hannah Friedman from an untitled Pixar feature, Disney Plus's Willow, Obi-Wan Kenobi, an untitled Doug Liman feature, Jacob Pinion of Fear the Walking Dead, an untitled Doug Liman feature, and Nick Bernadone, Fear the Walking Dead, and Artbook of Kimmy Schmidt are attached to adapt the books for a potential series. Now, the Riftwar Cycle is slightly different from the Riftwar Saga, because the cycle was written with Jenny Wirt, so it was a co-production. Anyway, this is an interesting thing because it says here BCDF Pictures previously acquired rights to the first novel Magician and commissioned Atomic Blonde screenwriter Kurt Johnstad to pen a TV script. This is the first time that the first six books, which combine the fantasy worlds of Midkemia and Kelowin, have been acquired together for development. Producers and former Lucasfilm executives Kiri Hart and Stephen Fetter are serving as consultants with additional creative team hires expected in the coming weeks. And this was all the way back in February. So there's some great information here and on the press release itself over at Deadline. But what I really want to get into is Ray Feist's comments on television adaptations as a whole and also his commentary on the Rings of Power, because I find it to be a fascinating insight into an author who is regularly involved in these types of things, and hopefully it provides an educational experience for a lot of people out there who might not understand how these types of things work. I think it's also great to just see inside the mind of one of my favorite authors, which is why I think it's a lot of fun to dive into. Excuse me for clearing my throat. I should probably mute those kind of things, but I always forget. Roll with it, people. So we're just going to scroll through and we're going to look for comments from Ray. He's got a comment here. He talks about how, so someone said, personally, we'll always have the books, so a good adaptation is a bonus, a bad one is irrelevant because the books persist. Oh my. I love these types of comments because this is the fans trying to claim ownership of things. Let's not mention authors that leave their fans with only adaptations where books should be. Oh my God, the arrogance of someone saying it's the author's fault for not having done enough, and then be grateful with whatever they do on screen. We've all been able to enjoy the full scope of the story, and it will still be ours to enjoy even if the adaptation is appalling. I love his comment here. He says, just keep in mind when you say authors, many times they have little or nothing to say in the matter. Regarding Rings of Power, as an example, Chris Tolkien died almost 3 years ago and his dad in 1973. So if you want to blame someone, estate lawyers is the right place to start. So this guy's not putting any blame on Amazon. He's not putting blame on the Tolkien estate. He's saying, look at the estate lawyers. Ultimately, they are the ones who are mostly responsible for these types of scenarios. Really good commentary here. He does say someone here that he actually likes the adaptation. He likes Rings of Power. Another person says, can't wait for this. Hope they do it justice. And also don't leave Thomas out. His story was just as amazing as Pug's, and I think is centric to the story in a whole. And Raymond says, leave Thomas out? Why in heaven's sake would they do that? That's like saying, would they do Lord of the Rings? When they do Lord of the Rings, I hope they don't leave Frodo out. Relax. They might leave me out, but never Thomas, Pug, Mara, Arutha, etc. This person says, I'm excited by this and a little terrified. After listening to the audiobooks, all the names were pronounced differently to how I have been saying them in my head for nearly 30 years, and the voices were way off how I was hearing them in my head. This is a great comment. The problem with audiobooks is sometimes they ask for a pronunciation guide and sometimes they don't. Audiobooks are a whole different division within a publishing house, sometimes in a whole different location, and some publishers with some publishers, they have their own audio studios and others rent time commercially. Audio narrators who are good are in demand, so like actors, they may be booked for something else when the publisher needs a new book made. If you're lucky, as we were for the Empire series, you get a really good narrator for the entire series. Other times it's hit and miss. It's just the way the publisher works. People often forget about the 2 million books that are published each year worldwide, a lot of them being tech manuals, coffee table picture books, cookbooks, so assume about 1/3 of those are fiction, and of that, a smaller percentage are converted to audio. That's still a lot of books to record. Audible right now has about 200,000 titles in their library, and classics are also being recorded as well as new fiction. So if you get a recording you really like, that's being lucky. Most are okay, and a few people really object to. This person says he's excited yet scared at the same time. Books have so much more depth. And he says there's a gent named Marshall McLuhan who wrote a book called Understanding Media in 1964 that explains that in great detail. Books are very cold media and require your brain to do a lot of work. Film, TV are very hot media, so you sit back when they do all the heavy lifting, requiring almost none of your imagination. It's why actors never look the way you expected, because you're not using your imagination. They are being described for you. This is a great comment. This person says, awesome. Please just make sure that they stay true to the books. I would hate to have a disaster like the John Carter movie. By the way, I do not think the John Carter movie was a disaster. I loved the John Carter movie. And this is where Raymond Feist, this is one of the reasons I love Feist, because he's not afraid to get in there and tell the fans they need to shut the fuck up sometimes. It's pretty good. He goes, sorry to be laughing, but while I really do get the desire and the impulse to express these feelings, that the adaptation has the same vibe as the book, anytime I read words like control, force, ensure, etc., I have to laugh. When someone spends serious money to put something on the screen, they hardly ever give the original author veto power. This goes back, well, I'll finish this here in a minute. It says, I'll spare everyone the long and somewhat bitter story of the Wheel of Time getting to the screen, but that's an instructive example of what happens when the rights holders, in this case Harriet, Jim's widow, and the development company, Red Eagle Entertainment, find themselves at cross purposes. Right now I'm getting along famously with 6 studios, and they're listening to Janny and me. Doesn't mean it will work out, but everyone is seriously trying, so fingers crossed. So if you go back to the complexities of the Rings of Power adaptation, and the rights agreement that the Tolkien estate has with Amazon, one of the things they were looking for in the bidding war that they initiated back in whatever it was, 2017 or whatever, they were actively looking for a production company that would let them maintain some measure of creative control over things because, as Raymond states, in most cases, when these companies are spending millions of dollars to purchase the rights to something, they don't want the author being involved. They might allow them to be involved as a consultant, but they're very rarely, if ever, going to give them any sort of veto control because they're purchasing the rights to do what they want with. That's why they're paying such a large amount of money. Brandon Sanderson has a very good discussion on the topic because after the recent Kickstarter success he said, Hollywood came knocking this past year. And he said, the beautiful part about being where I am is that I don't need money. So I get to sit here and hold all of the creative control and tell people, no, sorry. I'm not going to give away the creative control just for a big paycheck. I will happily co-produce and co-write something, but I am going to maintain creative control over the product because they are my products. And kudos to Brandon Sanderson for being able to be in a position to do so because most authors aren't, including Feist. Please don't let them turn this into Shannara or Rings of Power. Oh, by the way, before I get sidetracked, hang on. He also talks about the contentious relationship between the rights holder, which is Harriet, and the development company, Red Eagle Entertainment. If you haven't ever seen the horrific, like, web-produced, it was like a YouTube video that they just announced, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, it's been a while. Red Eagle Entertainment was about to lose the rights to the Wheel of Time, right? So what they have to do whenever they buy the rights, there's a certain window of time they have to make a production, right? And if they don't make a production within that time, the rights go back to the original rights holder. This is why you continually see new Batman productions with new actors, new Superman productions with new actors, new Spider-Man productions with new actors, because the rights holders have to continually produce content around those intellectual properties. Otherwise, those rights revert back to whoever is the owner or creator of those rights. Red Eagle didn't want the rights to revert, but they hadn't produced anything to date. So what they did is they threw together a very cheap, very poorly produced short film about the character of Lews Therin. And I've seen it, and it's been forever ago, but it was like a prequel type scenario of the Dragon Reborn, right? But it wasn't the Dragon; it was the Dragon. It was Lews Therin, and I forget. Billy Zane, I think, was the character. But did it was bad. It was really, really bad. But they did that as a way of saying, nope, we've fulfilled our contractual obligations to produce something within X amount of time. Therefore, we retain the rights to the Wheel of Time, and we can continue now to work on the next production. And it's a contentious relationship at best. So this person says, please don't let them do a Shannara or Rings of Power on this story. And this is where this is a beautiful comment from Ray. He says, I have zero control. That's the way it works. You try to do business with people who have a vision, and no one sets out to make a mess. Shannara had horrible marketing. Everyone thought it was an adaptation when in fact was sequel material. And I think Rings of Power is great. Soak on that for a little bit, everybody. He loves the Rings of Power adaptation. He also liked Shannara. He says somewhere else, I believe, in here, but he says it wasn't a problem of the show being good or not. It was that it was marketed incorrectly, which I think the Rings of Power was also marketed incorrectly. But here he says he has zero control. It's not up to him. This is another great one. He says, this person says, I really hope they do better than Amazon did with Wheel of Time. I was very excited for that and super let down. I look forward to seeing your amazing books come to TV. And I love it here because he, again, is correcting fans. He says Sony Pictures is the main producer of Wheel of Time, along with Little Island Production, Amazon Studios, Radar Pictures, and Wheel of Time Productions. I know some folks at several places. Radar Pictures, by the way, is Ted Field's company. They did Jumanji, Riddick, and several other major projects, like The Last Samurai, and they have been aboard from the start. TV is a crapshoot, and no one sets out to make a bad product. This is the second time he has reminded these fans that people who think that Rings of Power was maliciously, they maliciously tried to sabotage Tolkien. No one sets out to make a bad product. And he also goes on, if you read this comment, he says that it's not just Amazon involved. Sony Pictures is involved. It's the main producer is Sony Pictures, along with Little Island Productions, Amazon, Radar, and Wheel of Time Productions. So there are multiple production companies, and everyone's wanting to put all the blame on Amazon. I don't do that. Amazon is the distributor, and they do have some production, um, but a lot of the blame falls with Tolkien Estate and other places with Rings of Power. So it's a very this is why I love you know reading when Ray Feist posts things like this, and that's why I wanted to bring this to everybody's attention because there's some great commentary in here. Let's continue to go down. There's 1,000 comments. We're not going to get through them all today, but I'm just going to read for a little bit and see how far we get. I'm scrolling down until I see ones for him. Okay. Says this person said I missed that they had picked up Empire as well. Has there been any news around the timeline? He says, okay, not trying to sound grumpy, and I get sometimes there are so many comments people don't read them before asking questions. If by timeline you mean in development, no, because I will certainly share news as soon as I have it. If you mean timeline in terms of the internal structure of the two series and combining them, that's a whole nother thing. If it goes according to plan, Jana and I will help develop backstory about Mara and her family to match up with Pug and Thomas from episode 1, and then we'll continue through the 6 books. Magician, Silverthorn, and Darkness on one side, and then Daughter, Servant, and Mistress on the other side. So he's doing the saga and the cycle. Very interested. Fingers crossed and some toes as well. He says it's both series combined. Interesting. These people are asking what service will it premiere on? He says streaming services, it's way too far out to know. This is a development deal. Again, very important. Not a signed series for HBO or Netflix or wherever. We are a long way out from nailing down who is going to show it and in what countries, and if it's even going to go beyond the development phase. He also goes on to talk about the pitch process. He goes, making a pitch these days is very complicated processes. They've hired serious writers with credits on Star Wars, Willow, Fear the Walking Dead, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jimmy Schmidt, and serious artists and production design people already. And that's just to make a pitch, an early draft writer's Bible, and the various other things one needs these days. It's a massive undertaking, already costing more money than I made in my younger days over years. This is a brilliant insight into the fact that this company is basically they formed a production company with investment money, bought the rights to a saga that they're using as the basis for their initial production. They're creating on spec out of their own pocket, they are creating a pitch document, a writer's Bible, so on and so forth, and then they're going to start shopping this pitch around to networks to see if they can't get a pilot order, or better yet, a series order. This is very, very good insight into how these things work. Great, great, great stuff. Keep going down, view more comments. We're only into the first 100 comments of 1,000. He says, this person says, hope you're super involved in making sure they stick to the source material. There's so many great books ruined by terrible TV shows. I'd hate for them to scuff your incredible writing with bad acting or unscrupulous rewrites. And he says, I'm a consultant at this point, as is Jenny. Stick to the source material is open to interpretation. Different mediums means different choices, and we will be adding new material. This is fucking brilliant because this is the author of the series. This is much like Neil Gaiman being involved in his stuff and Stephen King being involved in all of his stuff. He's telling his fans source material is up for interpretation because it's not the same, because different mediums require different choices. So many people in the Rings of Power conversation have made these bold statements that, here's an example because I just did this video the other day. The Numenorians were 8 feet tall. Were they? And even if they were, is that something that has to be shown on screen to produce an adaptation that is good enough? Elves have to have long hair? Is that canon? Does that have to be in the show? Dwarven women have beards. And remember, I used to do the Dwarven Princess thing for like 8 months with a 2-year-long beard. I get it. I've been there. I've been in the trenches having these conversations. But it's great to see an author who has been published with more than 20 million copies sold worldwide and someone who's actively involved in this telling people, hey man, source material, and that means different things to different people. Sticking to the source material is open to interpretation because different mediums require different choices, and we'll be adding new material, which again, Rings of Power did the exact same thing. They added new material. Remember, they wrote the novel that Tolkien never did, and people threw their hands up and had a hissy fit. I think rightfully so. In some cases, I'm not a fan of the many characters that they introduced. But what's very useful to me is to see an actual author of a series saying, I'm involved in a production. We're going to be doing as much as we can to keep it as close to the source material, but it's their interpretation, not mine. And we are actively creating new material for the show that isn't in the books. Very, very, very important because you know there's going to be backlash from fans against Ray Feist when this show, if it ever comes out, when this show hits the airwaves, if it does, there will be a backlash from certain fans who are going to say, well, that's not the way Mara was in the book. That's not the way Pug was in the book. That's not the way Thomas was in the book. Nah. Even though he was involved in the process of creating these new things for the show. Very, very fascinating to read through this stuff. I'm excited but worried it will be screwed up like other recent shows adapted from very good books. Ah, I love it. He says, look, all you worrywarts, as my mother used to call me when I was a kid, relax. We haven't screwed it up yet. Give us time. Um, he doesn't know yet where it's going to be published or produced, excuse me. Very happy for you, Raymond. Hope they do as good a job as they did with Jack Reacher on Amazon. I would love if each book was a season. He says, odd thing about Reacher is it's a brilliantly so-so story that's been realized in a brilliant way. It is a serious let's redo Roadhouse vibe, which I understand is inherited from the original material, but otherwise it is so well done. But anyway, no one starts off to make a bad show. Main question is, when the hell is this happening? Ray Feist says, whenever there's a lot of moving parts coming together, he says, I grew up in the TV racket, and it's so much more complex today than it was when there were only 3 TV networks and one primetime syndication company in the US. The rise of cable in the 1970s caused a sea of change in how the business was run, and that pales in comparison to what we're seeing right now with everyone trying to figure out what the financial realities of streaming are. It's like Game of Thrones wasn't a thing until HBO bought it, and suddenly everyone wants the next Game of Thrones. Following a trend is fraught with peril, and that hasn't changed since I was a kid. Um, Something about they were in a rush. The creators were done apparently wanted to, oh, this is about Game of Thrones. It says they were in a rush towards the end. They were done, wanted to move on to other projects. Unknown actors from the first seasons of Game of Thrones were then stars wanting stars money. So 10 episodes were cut to 6 because of the fact that, and we've talked about that before in a budget episode we did comparing Rings of Power to Game of Thrones and the budget. Um, TV series, Six Studios is aiming to have 4 to 6 seasons of the show. That seems to be a fairly standard commitment that most people want. Does anyone have idea on the timing they release the first movie? He says first movie. It's a development deal for a TV series. People don't read sometimes. He says sometimes this stuff takes a long time. Sometimes deals fall apart. I just hope it gets to the screen before I'm too old to stay up and watch it. Because he is 76. So even if this comes together fairly quickly in the next 4 to 5 years, he's going to be 80 years old before this actually makes it to the screen. Because they still got to pitch it, and then it has to get a production run and more things. To be quite honest, this may be the most excited and nervous I've ever been for an adaptation. Will it be The Witcher or Wheel of Time? He says it will be its neither. It's going to be its own thing. One can hope for the best. Now we're up to 200 out of 1,000. How far in are we? Oh, we're already 23 minutes. I told you this is going to be a longer one. So excited for this. I've been reading Save the Cat writes a novel and I have been trying to figure out to see some of my favorite books follow this format. I can't figure out if Magician Apprentice follows it or if it's more than that. Both Apprentice and Master together follow that. A trilogy had Ritchie made the world of Macamia. It says Magician was always a single novel split in two by Bantam for paperback. As for Save the Cat, I wrote Magician over 36 years before it. I have no idea what follows that. That's a very good point. It's been a long time ago the Magician came out. To be honest, I hadn't gotten this far when I was reading through this the other day, so I don't know how much deeper he's gotten. I don't see any more comment. Here's one from him. Please make sure they don't butcher the story and characters like Wheel of Time or The Witcher and make it a woke agenda push. He says, Force, that's not how this industry works. Besides, whatever gets put on the screen will never be the same as the movie in your head. And that's okay, because that movie in your head will never be the same as the movie in my head when I wrote the books. Oh, I freaking love it when authors come out and call out fans who are on this woke bandwagon. And he's like, look, nothing's ever going to match up to what you've got in here. And that is something I've touched on with so many Rings of Power videos that I've done over the past, I guess it'll be February's going to be a year. So it's been 10 months I've been doing Rings of Power videos. And I keep telling people there is no such thing because you see so many people saying things like, oh, there has to be a minimum standard of quality if they're ever going to make a Tolkien show. Well, what is that minimum standard of quality? Because everyone has a different version up here of what that minimum standard of quality is. I've used this example in the past. If you ask 100 carpenters how to build a house, you're going to get 100 different answers. There is never one way to do things. There is code, which establishes sort of a minimum guideline, but it's not a necessarily the way it has to be done. You just have to make sure that you fit within this framework, and that's no different than television and film. They have an established framework that works, but anything that you want to do within that framework is up to you. But I love the fact that he's telling them that, no one forces anything. And beyond that, anything it puts on screen is never going to be the same as the movie in your head, which is never going to be the same as the movie in my head when I wrote it. I love it. Claiming ownership of his intellectual property and telling fans that it's never going to be the same as what they have in their heads. Let's do a quick scan if he's got any more down here because we're getting pretty deep in the comments and I don't know if he's Facebook may be cranking out on me because it's not wanting to load the next phase. There we go. Honestly, I don't see any more right off the top of my head, so we're already getting down into the 400s now. So I think that's probably as deep as we're going to go with this. So I'd say this, I think for me, was just a brilliant insight into one of my favorite authors, someone who is a bestseller, having sold 20 million copies of his books over the years, wading into the conversation and saying he likes the Rings of Power adaptation, and also giving an insight into things like the hiccups with the Shannara series had nothing to do with it being a bad show, with the fact that it was mismarketed, the fact that no one forces a woke agenda on any show, no one tries to make a bad production, they don't set out to make bad productions. It's just the way TV works. So it's brilliant insight from an author who has a lot of time in the industry and has worked on the TV end as well as a writer, and has a lot of great things to say and hopefully has provided folks with some input and some insight into how these things work. Love to hear your thoughts. Drop them down in the comments below. As always, if you've gotten to the end here, hopefully I've earned a like, subscription, and hitting that bell icon so you never miss an update. Excuse me. We are live every morning at 6 a.m. with premieres like this discussing a variety of topics from the Wheel of Time to Rings of Power, Star Wars, Star Trek, and beyond. Hopefully, I've also earned some form of financial support from you because I stay on the air thanks to the support of all of my fans. Members here on YouTube, as well as members over on the Patreon page. We also have, during these premieres, super chats and stickers. You could just pick an amount and donate here while you're live, and then after the fact you can do super thanks. And we also have a Patreon page for my own fantastical world where we have an unfolding book series, a point and click adventure game, and a 5th edition tabletop setting. So hopefully we'll see you over there as well. And don't forget the Discord and my live streams. I play a lot of video games on this channel and beyond. Till next time, everybody, happy reading. Stay safe out there.